Okay, so for quadratic inequalities, for this problem we have f of x is less than or equal to 4. So what we're going to do is we're going to draw a line at 4. The reason why we're going to draw a solid line is because we have an equal to sign, less than or equal to. That means that 4 will be included with our function, so it needs to be a solid line. So as f of x is less than or equal to, so we want smaller values than 4. So we're going to shade down. From here we need to see what our x values are. So we can take the line and draw it from where this intersection is down to our x-axis to see what exactly these values are going to be. And we have -2 and 2. So we're going to write those down, -2 and 2, and we're going to put space in between them. Put an x in between them, and then we need to see, okay, so I want numbers greater than -2, so x needs to be greater than -2, and I want numbers smaller than +2, so x needs to be less than 2. So that's how we write our inequality statement, and that's your answer to this quadratic inequality problem. So then we take a look at f of x is less than -1. Since it's not less than or equal to, we're going to do a dotted line now because -1 is not included in our function. So it says f of x is less than. So we want to shade down from this line. And again, we need to see what our x values are. And you can always just draw a line from this intersection to the x-axis. And we see that what we have is -1 and 3. So we're going to write those down with our x in between. And we now see that instead of wanting numbers larger than -1, we want numbers smaller than -1. So x needs to be less than -1. And instead of wanting numbers smaller than 3, we want numbers larger than 3, so x needs to be greater than 3. So our inequality statement is -1 is greater than x is greater than 3. So what happens if we're just given an inequality function? No graph. Well, you solve it like you would a quadratic equation. Change your inequality sign to an equal sign. So we have -3x squared plus 3x plus 90 equals 0. Always look and see if you can get your GCF out first. And since 3 goes into 3, 3, and 90, we can factor out a 3. If our a value is negative, we want to pull the negative out there with it. So we end up getting a positive x squared, a positive and a negative gives us -x, and a positive and a negative gives us -30. Okay, so since a is now 1, we can just simply factor it out. What times what gives us x squared? It's x. Then we think, what factors of 30 subtract to give us -1? And the factors are 6 and 5. And the largest factor gets the sign of the middle term. So 6 will be negative and 5 will be positive. And those equal 0. So now we're going to set x minus 6 equal to 0 and x plus 5 equal to 0. Then we just solve for x on both sides. So add 6 to both sides and we get x equals 6. Subtract 5 on both sides and we get x equals -5. So our solutions that can go on a line that will help us make our inequality statement -5 and 6. Okay, we can put closed circles at these 2 points since we've got less than or equal to. Since we've got the line under the inequality, we can shade inside those points. So then we need to test points below -5, in between -5 and 6, and above 6. So what we're going to do is we're going to pick a number less than -5, so -6. negative 3 minus 6 squared plus 3 times negative 6 plus 90 is less than or equal to 0. We end up getting negative 36 is less than or equal to 0. Since this is a true statement, we're going to place a check mark above that interval. Then we're going to pick a number between negative 5 and 6, so 0. So we do negative 3 times 0 squared plus 3 times 0 plus 90 is less than or equal to 0. When we do this and we put it in our calculator, we get 90 is less than or equal to 0. Since this statement is false, we're going to put an X mark above this interval. Then we'll check our finer interval. So a number larger than 6. We'll do 7. Negative 3 times 7 squared plus 3 times 7 plus 90 is less than or equal to 0. When we do this, we get negative 36 again is less than or equal to 0. Since this is a true statement, we can put a check mark above. So anytime we see a check mark, that means we can shade in that direction. So then we can write our inequality statement. So we have negative 5 and 6 with an X in between. We shaded smaller values, so X needs to be less than negative 5. And then with 6, we shaded bigger values, so X needs to be greater than 6. So this is our inequality statement for this quadratic inequality. For this next one, we're going to do the same thing. We're going to set it equal to 0, so 3x squared plus 17x plus 10 equals 0. Okay, there's no greatest common factor for this, so we need to factor it out. And we can use the box method if we want to. So first term in the first box, last term in the last box. And then we've got to get rid of this a value. So we multiply 3 to 10, and we end up getting 30. So what factors of 30, since it's positive, we're going to find factors of 30 that add to give us 17. And it's 15 and 2. And they're both going to be positive since 17x is positive. So we get 15x, we get 2x. So our GCF in the first row is 3x. Our GCF in the second row is 2. GCF in the first column is x, and GCF in the second column is 5. And you can always go back and check. 3x and x is 3x squared, 2 and x is 2x. 3x and 5 is 15x, and 2 and 5 is 10. So now we've got our factors. We've got x plus 5 equals 0, and 3x plus 2 equals 0. Now we just solve for x. So we're going to subtract 5 on both sides here. We get x equals negative 5. Subtract 2 on both sides for this one, and we get 3x equals negative 2. Divide both sides by 3, and x equals negative 2/3. So now we can do our inequality line. We have negative 5 and negative 2/3. So we're going to test points smaller than negative 5, in between negative 5 and negative 2/3, and above, greater than negative 2/3. Also, since we have a less than sign, we need open circles, meaning we're not including negative 5 and negative 2/3. So a number less than negative 5, negative 6. So our function we have 3 times negative 6 squared plus 17 times negative 6 plus 10 is less than 0. So we end up getting 16 less than 0. This is a false statement. So down here at our line, we can put an X above that interval. Then we can test in between negative 5 and negative 2/3. So we're going to do 3 negative 4 squared squared plus 17 negative 4 plus 10 is less than 0. And you end up getting negative 10 less than 0. This is a true statement, so we're going to put a check above there. Last interval is greater than negative 2/3, and we get 0. So 3, 0 squared plus 17 times 0 plus 10 is less than 0, and we get 10 is less than 0. Since this statement is false, we put an X above there, and since we have a check in between, we shade in between. So our inequality statement is going to be from negative 5 to negative 2/3 with X in between. Since we shaded above negative 5, X needs to be greater than that. And since we shaded below negative 2/3, X needs to be smaller than that. So our inequality statement is negative 5 is less than X is less than negative 2/3. And that's how you do quadratic inequalities.